Well, good evening again, and as mentioned in that previous video, I said I would spend a little bit of time going through all the Josudis. So currently looking at Josudi Hercules, which was the one we introduced for this season for 2017. We're now getting smaller flowers on it because it was a tendency to go sort of oversized for a miniature. We're cutting quite a lot of blooms for this for our cut flower sales, as it's a nice sort of harvest colour. So I would have expected it to have a much bigger flush than this on had we been leaving it. But some nice blooms on there, but the main thing is trying to keep it down from size, so growing plenty up. I meant to bring my rings down and I haven't, and I've got everything else locked up now. So, but we have got plants of this growing at the very top end of the nursery, where rather than being planted in these nets at 16 inches apart and stopped at about 5 pairs, 6 pairs and just allowed to grow, ones at the top are only planted 8 inches apart, so a lot tighter, and the plants have produced a lot smaller flowers, as you'd probably expect. Still only stopped at about 5 pairs, but because the competition's there between them, they're planted every planting hole. They've got the same sort of number of breaks, but producing a much tighter and actually neater flower. So that's maybe something, another way of keeping it down. And then this is Telstar, which I think I'd probably have a job getting that to go through the ring at the moment, quite a job. But again, it's because we haven't had the time to go around double stop and sort of pinch back to get a one stop on them, and then that's it. So if they're only coming up with sort of like 12 breaks or 10 breaks, there will be a bit bigger than what is needed for the class. But I do know from last year these were producing some very nice smaller blooms on second flushes where there's plenty of them. So these were the 2 varieties that we introduced for the 2017 season, and then we've obviously got a few more in line for 2018. One of which is this one that's at the planted in the separate row here, which is Josudi Neptune, which is a lovely bicolour. That's personally probably my favourite of them. I know the colour does tend to change as the blooms age, but when they're nice and fresh, that bicolour part of it is much sharper. The plants make a lovely habit. It's going to have lots of flower coming on this. Again, I know, what's the point of having this many blooms at the end of September when there could be a frost any night, but it's just the circumstances with us like this year. And we do actually find this one a little bit later than some of the other ones, but certainly they're full blooms. Plant habit is lovely, and these ones I did try and sort of like knock back and give them sort of a second stop so as to keep the size down, and that would still, that's a neat bloom. Right, here we are going through them all alphabetically. The ones we have planted. Josudi Paulo, which it's the second year we've tried this. As a bloom, it is very nice. But probably too big and might have a job keeping the size down. What I'm not liking on this at the moment, and it could just be the lateness of the season, is that the necks aren't holding the flowers up. Now I have some growing in the greenhouse of these in pots, and I'm not having this problem like at all. And the plant and the flower quality is much thicker. So whether it's just like the early blooms, obviously the colder temperatures, the lack of sun for ripening the blooms, a combination of factors, I think. Josudi Andromeda. Everybody's been talking about this one. We haven't been round and sort of cleaned all of these up. This one's going to have to be like grown again and some stock selection done, which I think people are, that I've got plants out with are like aware of, because we are getting blooms that are maybe not enough petal in. I'm saying maybe not, definitely not enough petal in. you can see from there. But then on similar plants you're getting blooms that are much neater and full of petal with plenty depth. And I've got to bear in mind this was only a 2014 seedling for Peter, so we only got it in 2016 and he'd only really had a chance to grow it for a year, so it's still under sort of like stock selection, I suppose. So I've got to try and sort some out and see what we can do. Josudi Aurora, which is the other new introduction for this year, first blooms were a little bit too heavy because I hadn't restricted them enough, but now we're getting a flush of really nice blooms coming through of a good size with quite a bit more sort of petal in them, so that's got like good depth and clean at the back. Yes, it's got probably, I know Dave Spencer was commenting, it's got like a narrow window for showing, which is like fair comment, but when it's right, it is a beautiful little flower. Very prolific, particularly as its best. And these did get like a double stop, but that's given us late blooms, but also kept the size down. So look at that, how neat is that? Then a couple of varieties that we haven't seen before this year, which Peter sent us in January, which is Josudi Borealis, which is a pink, as you can see. Very fine petals, so I would say true cactus, miniature cactus form. I'll probably have to give this another look at to give it a chance and try and get the blooms flowering at the right time rather than this late in the season, as we will have to do the same with Josudi Capella, which again is probably like a true cactus form. Bit more petal in this one than the Borealis. Quite a neat little flower, maybe a little bit hockey sticked at the back end. But not a bad little bloom. Colour wise, my favourite is Jisoo Titan, working back up the row. Such a bright vivid orange, but I think the blooms is going to be too, well, they are too shallow. There's just not enough petal there, and too untidy a form when it gets out, and it also tends to fade quite easily at the back before the blooms really get fully open. So I'm not sure what will happen to this one. Again, it's the first year, so in all fairness I really need to probably grow it again and try and get the timing a little bit better to see how it does, rather than letting it flower too late on in the season. It might be much better flower if it was sort of flowering August, September rather than September into October. Josudi Sunburst, much talked about bicolour. Funny combination of flowers, this magenta sort of like red at the tips and a yellow base. I'm not sure, which sounds a terrible thing to say, but there's not been many decent blooms. In fact, I haven't really managed to cut a decent bloom off here, whether it's our soil or the conditions or the lateness again. But there's a few people growing this, so I'll be getting in touch to get their feedback and assessment on it as well. Then we have the very compact Josudi Saturn, lovely yellow. Now this is much better looking than it was like last year, and having some very nice little blooms on it. And I was at the point of thinking this is gonna not make it, and then you get little blooms like that coming through. Sorry, the light is gone now, so you know this is like a lemon yellow with a slightly darker eye that you can see there. New this year, as we only got it sent in January, is Polaris, which is the white. Saw this at Harrogate and I think it would have been 2014 or 15, and I thought the blooms were going to be a little bit too shallow to do anything, but now I'm having second thoughts and thinking this could be useful, possibly form wise a little bit too open petals, but there's still quite a good centre there to come, and it's staying very, very clean at the moment. Yes, the odd petal dampen at the back there, that's still got centre there, and it's got a nice outline to the flower. Very even in its habit, very late for the problems I've already been on about, that we, you know, I let myself down with the timing of getting the sort of the stock cuttings taken and how hard some of them were and the chop backs they needed. So they took, you know, a couple of weeks to really get going again. You know, nice bloom on the side of the plant there. So this will definitely be worth a go. I know these particular blooms won't go through the ring, but they are just growing the first flush. Really, I've only been just budding to 1.5 pairs, and maybe should have been just left them. But that's a good stalk on there and good strong stems on it. Plants are standing around about 4.5 foot, and looks very, very nice. Then we've got Josudi Pluto, which the colour is absolutely fantastic. It's just the flower form that lets it down. Very, very thin, but yet on pot tuber stock it's producing much better blooms, and on the second flush of flowers it's producing much better blooms with a lot more petal in them. So we'll have to give it a go again and just see what it does, because Peter had shown a really nice vase of it at the Cornish Daily Society show, got a picture of it, but I say whether there's enough to get a good depth, I'm not sure. But that bloom there, yes, very young, but there's quite a centre in there at the moment. Then we have Neptune that we've already talked about. This was my main planting batch, so there's been quite a few cut off here, and it's coming with sort of fuller flushes of flower now. And then we have Mercury, this sort of apricot, peachy, tan colour. Very unusual colour to describe. Very free, masses of bud on here. There's been an awful lot of flower on it. What's the problems with it, if any? The outline I think is pretty good, plenty petal in there. Sometimes I think in the centre the petals are maybe a little bit sort of too decky and a little bit isolated at times, and flat top, which is more accentuated on some blooms than others. At that stage it looks not so bad, but on a bloom that's much more out, which I can't find one at the minute, even though there's plenty on it. Actually, they're looking a lot better today. That was a problem I saw noticed last week, but it was the first few flowers. Maybe it's just because there's a lot more coming now. It looks a lot more even, a lot more interesting. I know there's a few people seen it, commented about how nice it looks and the form of it being really, really good. I say I was just like a little bit worried about it. But who am I to judge? When you look at it there, you'd think, blimey, that looks really, really good, really interested. It's just sometimes when you look closer in it. So we'll try it again, definitely. And then the last one is Josudi Jupiter, which is a soft pink bi-colour or blend, pink to white blend, but none of this really has enough petal to it. I'd say I've got some plants in pots in the greenhouses that might have shown a better example, but outside certainly, unfortunately, there's nothing really there, which is a shame. Just come round this side of the Mercury, just have another look. Certainly size-wise it fits in much better than some of the other ones. It does stay sort of much smaller. But there we go. It's getting a bit too dark now to get the best colours off these. So that's the Josudi ones in a bit of detail. So feedback would be welcome on those. It's quite difficult with these when I've got to make sort of decisions without being able to really speak to the raiser as to what to do with these. Very, very sad that they've become there's so much interested in them, and that poor Peter's not about to see them or take credit for them. This is Polaris again. Had to walk back down this side because there's some nice flowers here. You know, that there and the depth on that. Okay, so hope that was of interest, and just to finish off, I'll close in on that Westertonella Grace and the Spenethorn Pamela. And why not get a bit closer on Josudi Aurora, because that is just outstanding at the moment. So much bud on there. Right. Good night, folks.